In the Analog Duo video, I made a point of making it abundantly clear how I feel about the priciest games on the PC Engine aftermarket. Stuff like Magical Chase, Sylphia, and Gingafuke Densetsu Sapphire, when there's a reproduction scene out there making these games available at a much more reasonable price. However, it was what at the time felt like a throwaway comment toward the end of the video, albeit a related one, that really got me thinking after the video went up. That's what I'm here to talk about today. Let me clarify one thing though. Although the topic of discussion leans heavily on the PC Engine for context, this is not a strictly PC Engine video. I'm speaking on the entirety of retro gaming here. This is Little Akiba Games, I'm Patrick, welcome back to the shop. First of all, to address a possible elephant in the room, I want to make it clear that I meant no offense when I expressed misgivings about the Analog Duo bringing an influx of new players into the PC Engine market. I'm thrilled that new players are finding their way to this system more than 3 decades after the fact. It's a great console and it deserves the attention from players who haven't had a chance to explore its rich library. Rather, to explain my actual sentiments, a little context is needed. Specifically, at the start of the Analog Duo video, I mentioned that there were 2 previous events to the Analog Duo that landed lots of new eyes on the PC Engine in recent years. High Score Girl and the PC Engine Mini, both of which spiked awareness of the system and its games, and with it the going market rates thereof. Unfortunately, the last few years have thus undermined one of the PC Engine's signature features, the affordability of its software. Because of this, it stands to reason that another new wave of players, thankfully accompanied by a new wave of hardware, would affect the software market further, and we're already seeing the effects of that, as places like Hit Japan, Japan 4U, which I really need to cover on a future Digital Akiba segment, and even Super Potato are getting cleaned out of their PC Engine software stock, and the Gaijin tax, the often absurd premium one pays for North American versions of games that are still reasonably affordable in Japan because they were grossly underprinted over here, is already trending upward on the TurboGrafx-16 side of things, where it was already pretty bad. Expect to pay around 2 or 3 times the cost of a PC Engine version of Final Lap Twin for a TurboGrafx-16 version, for example. It stands to reason. We're creating new players, but the publishers aren't printing new games. Exacerbating the problem, of course, is a pool of collectors and speculators who go out of their way to commodify games rather than treat them as something to be fired up and enjoyed. They've spent years, possibly even decades, piling up games not to play them, but for their potential monetary value. This is a problem throughout the entire retro space, and they've been a target of my disdain for that reason as long as game rarities have even existed. But in the PC Engine space in particular right now, High Score Girl, the TurboGrafx-16 Mini, and the Analog Duo comprise a perfect storm for value appreciation that probably has that group feeling as though now is their time. If not for certain countering effects in the market, it probably would be. Prices are being driven up by people who bought these games with no intention of ever playing them, and I will always advise you to go out of your way to avoid giving them your money. Thankfully, all is not lost. There's a healthy reproduction scene out there churning out new copies of a lot of these games, and the more people know about it and take part, the more the market will correct and we can get some of those ballooning prices under control. If we have to sacrifice a few hundred copies of Moto Rotor, China Warrior, and Power Golf so that more people can play Magical Chase and Soldier Blade, that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. I'll leave links to some of my favorites down in the description. There has always been a certain stigma around reproductions in retro gaming, often being referred to much less charitably as bootlegs. Now, the difference between a reproduction and a bootleg is admittedly fuzzy. Some might even say it's negotiable. I've dealt with my fair share of gamers who dismiss or even vilify them as an inauthentic experience even though the code is identical, line for line and byte for byte, to their legitimate retail counterparts from back in the day, which has always struck me as a cope from collectors who ascertain more utility from the monetary value of their games than from actually enjoying the experience of playing them. It's pretty pathetic, really. At this point, I'd be more likely to call reproductions necessary, regardless of labels or semantics. For my part, when I talk about a reproduction, I'm referring to a retro game ROM installed onto a donor cartridge or a writable disc, whereas when I talk about bootlegs, with all the negative connotations therein, I'm referring specifically to unauthorized fabrication of games that are already actively being sold at retail by the publisher, which absolutely does happen, but is far less common. The difference? To sum it up, ethics. By all means, if you can buy a game from a publisher that meets your personal standard of ownership, whatever that standard might happen to be, you should always do it. However, when it comes to out-of-print games that publishers and developers have long since lost their ability to profit from, the only people losing money are the collectors and speculators I mentioned before. and it's really hard to feel any sympathy for them when they're really no different from scalpers, creating a problem in an effort to sell the solution, at a premium of course. Looking at the retro gaming environment today, with new players being introduced to it all the time, the real hardware side of this space would become truly unsustainable if it wasn't for the existence of reproductions. We simply need a greater supply to match the growing demand, and it's high time we got rid of any lingering stigmas surrounding the reproductions that help solve this problem. They're only going to get more important from here. Another real hardware alternative in situations where the reproduction community perhaps just hasn't gotten around to a certain game is the SD loader, the most famous example across most platforms being the EverDrive. These are cartridges with an SD card slot, allowing you to pack a card with ROMs and then play them on real hardware, effectively bridging the gap between ROMs and the console experience. The games come in the same form you would run them in an emulator, but you're able to use them on an actual system with the help of these SD loaders. A key upside to both reproduction releases and SD loaders is that they also open up the ability to play non-retail titles, like new releases and ROM hacks, just like you would be able to in an emulator. The obvious recent example is Dino Force on the PC Engine, but it also potentially extends to the 30+ games in active development for the Sega Genesis as I speak. And who knows what other projects might emerge in the future. There are plenty of outstanding modded titles like Chrono Trigger Crimson Echoes that are worth going out of your way to experience, and yes, it can be found in cartridge form thanks to this very practice. This has also allowed for the installation of fan-translated ROMs onto cartridges, making games like Bahamut Lagoon and Ys 5 The Lost Sand Kingdom of Caffeine, neither of which have had official English language releases of any kind, playable in English on an actual Super Nintendo. For those who want to play these games in English but prefer the actual console experience to using an emulator, this is incredible. I'll be talking a lot more about fan translations very soon, so look forward to that. It's definitely a topic that deserves its own video. The way I see it, reproductions are about to go from being a great convenience to the absolute lifeblood of the retro scene, taking rarities almost entirely off the board and opening up the broader historic libraries of these classic consoles for the world to enjoy, or even allowing them to grow further. I for one intend to go out of my way to give reproduction outfits like PCE Works and Nightwing my business in 2024 to help support this, and I absolutely encourage you to do the same. That's all for now. If you like this video, then please be sure to let YouTube know it by liking, commenting, sharing, and especially subscribing as the channel's push to 1,000 subscribers in 2024 continues. Click the notification bell if you want to know right away when the next video drops. I look forward to seeing you back here next time at Little Akiba Games.